Okay, at this time, I would like to introduce Ann Southall, Chair of the ESA Foundation, and she will give a brief synopsis of what we can learn from this workshop this evening. Ann?
Good evening, everyone. And again, sorry for the little blip in the radar there, but the objective of this educational this evening is to learn the main points on how communication amongst our generations is affected by the way that we think and the way that we speak. This evening, the workshop committee will be discussing ways how we as ESA members can better communicate amongst ourselves. Not only learn how we can be more effective in communicating between generations, but also why it is important to understand each generation's unique communication style. The longevity of our members serving this organization is rare unto itself. It's not unusual that we recognize members with 50 years plus of service each year. Therefore, it is important to understand each generation's unique communication style and how it can enable all of us to better communicate amongst ourselves and across generations. You will hear some good information on the subject of communication this evening. We hope you enjoy it and you learn something. If you have questions as we go along, please enter that in the chat feature and we will answer those questions at the end of the program. At this time, we'll start a short video, Generation Overview, what makes each generation unique and how we work together.
I'm a baby boomer. I'm Gen X.
I'm a millennial. I am Generation Z.
We've all heard these generation names, but what do they really mean? Psychologist and Generation Me author Jean Twenge helped us out.
Generations are really about culture. Cultures change and generations change along with the culture because younger generations, it's the only world that they have ever known.
Of course, people hate change, and that angst comes out as tension among the generations. Young punks.
People who are very cynical, like all my old dude teachers.
These opinions can make a real difference in how we see each other, talk to each other, and work with each other, which is generational expert Scott Zimmer's specialty.
We call them clash points, which just means we're approaching the same thing a little bit differently, and it can create a little bit of tension.
The first step in breaking that tension is understanding. So here's a rundown of the current generation, starting with baby boomers. Born between 1946 and 1964, they put generational narcissism on the map.
They were the hippies of the 60s and they became the yuppies of the 80s.
Yeah, those hippies are now workaholics, working 50, 60, even 70 hours a week.
For them, hard work really meant FaceTime, and not the Facebook app, but actually being here. The longer I'm here, the harder I'm working.
That's not to say they haven't embraced Facebook.
I love Facebook. I use it for news, but it's completely leisure for me.
So they do have some free time. Next up, Generation X, you know, the ones you probably forgot about, that were born roughly between 1965 and 1980.
Xers were a generation of latchkey kids. We saw the divorce rate skyrocket. We saw more moms entering the workplace.
Xers have a bit of middle child syndrome, so yeah, we have issues.
I think of Generation X as a little bit pessimistic.
Of course we are. We didn't win trophies for everything. Hello, millennials.
So their parents and teachers told them things like, believe in yourself and anything is possible. You can be anything you want to be. You are special. Very, very individualistic advice, and advice that wasn't given back in the 50s.
Millennials were born between 1980 and 1994. They're all about tolerance and experiences, and that is changing the workplace.
I really like to have a work-life balance in a job.
This is a generation that introduced the concept of work-life integration.
Yeah, thanks for the work emails at 10 o'clock at night. Finally, there's iGen, or Generation Z, or whatever they're called.
They're new, so they haven't really landed on a name yet.
This generation is defined as people born after 1994.
They're the first generation to not even know a world without smartphones.
I will spend like 2 or 3 hours on my phone.
So they're going blind with optimism.
They want to align themselves with a company that has a message and a purpose that is in line with their own beliefs.
Your job shouldn't feel like work. It should be something you're passionate about.
Yeah, that's called unemployed. So what's the final word on this epic generational struggle?
People sometimes think that millennials will just become boomers as they get older, and that's not the case. The traits that boomers have today that we really see stand out are the ones they developed when they were young. So it's a matter of understanding these different approaches.
Bringing the generations together is at the top of the list.
The graph shows the 5 generations we will be speaking about tonight. The first is the silent generation, who were born between 1928 and 1945. This generation makes up 9.3% of our population. And that's how I know this is the wrong slide. In 2022, this generation will range in age from 76 to 93 years old. The next is the baby boomer generation. This generation was born between 1946 and 1964. It makes up 21.4% of the population. In 2022, this generation will range in age between 57 and 74. The next generation is Generation X. They were born between 1965 and 1980. They make up 19.7% of our population. In 2022, this generation will range in age from 41 to 56. The next generation is the millennial generation. They were born between 1981 and 1996. They make up 27.2% of the population and are now the largest generation. In 2022, they will range in age between 25 and 40. The last generation is Generation Z. They were born after 1996. They make up 22.4% of our population. In 2022, they will range in age between 0 and 26 years old. Next, I would like to introduce Pat Howerton, and she'll tell us about the maturists.
Thank you, Judy. The silent generation, or the maturists, are the team members who have been in the workforce the longest. They're between the greatest generation and the baby boomers. They are in their mid to late 70s and make up about 2% of today's workforce in the United States, usually in a part-time capacity. This group endured the Great Depression of 1930 and brought the United States out of World War II. Rules of order, respect for authority, and following directions are all important characteristics of this generation. During a time of tremendous change, this generation was shaped by many events, including World War II, the Korean War, President Roosevelt's New Deal, the rise of corporations, and space exploration. They were raised by parents who survived the Depression, so they are used to lean times. As a group, they prefer more formal communication. Give them your undivided attention, use eye contact, and listen closely. And now I would like to introduce Rosalie Griffith to talk about the baby boomers.
Thank you, Pat. Many chapters throughout ESA have members with a great generation gap. I know in my own chapter, we have that. Now, that's not a bad thing, but sometimes we can find it hard to communicate or understand each other. We can be quick to judge without thinking or not want to listen in a way that could enable us to better understand each other. Sometimes this can cause problems within the chapter because members can't come to an understanding. Pat gave a great example of how those born prior to 1945 communicated. Baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964 and make a good portion of society today. I can relate to that era. The reason we are known as baby boomers is because we were born after the World War II ended and a number of births exploded. The thing about baby boomers is that we were born in an era that had just witnessed a lot of war and horror. Our parents witnessed a dreadful and difficult time and only hoped for the best for their children. We were raised in a time when there wasn't advanced technology and innovation like there is today. Information did not come easy, and we had to start from scratch, and there wasn't supporting data to provide information or feedback and assurance. Technology has changed us in many ways. We work and communicate with each other. The communication between the different generations describes the different perspectives members have on different issues. We need to ignore the generation gap and focus on developing better bonds with those who helped us get to where we are. We need each other to create a more efficient and productive society. We can't go back, but only move forward. We must be open to new ideas and changes within the organization in order for us to grow and prosper. Although baby boomers sometimes find it hard to keep up with technology and communicating with the younger generation, they are teaching us how to do it better. I personally don't always like change, but have found change to be profound at times, and that's a good thing. Baby boomers have just come a long way. And I would like to introduce Judy York, and she's going to enlighten us a little about the Generation X. Judy?
All right, Generation X. People were born between 1965 and 1980 are known as Generation X. And most of these were, for me, my children. They were the first generation to grow up with personal computers and use digital technology in their youth. They grew up with minimal adult supervision and learned to be resourceful, independent, and are keen on maintaining work-life balance. They tend to be more liberal on social issues than baby boomers. They appreciate informality, are technologically adept, flexible, and highly educated. Gen Xers tend to perform better under minimal supervision. They are results-oriented and hardworking. They value diversity, challenges, and responsibility. They enjoy creative input and resourcefulness. They embrace technology and social media. Next up is Jennifer Skinner, and she will talk to us about Generation X.
Thank you. Those born between 1981 and 1995 are considered millennials, or Gen Y. The oldest became adults around the turn of the millennium. Millennials have been described as the first global generation and the first generation that grew up in the age of the internet. They stay connected to others digitally. Millennials have also grown up in a time of rapid change, giving them a set of priorities and expectations that are different from previous generations. They often have large student debt, less money to spend, and are living at home longer. However, they tend to be confident and optimistic, even though maybe sometimes a bit unrealistic. But remember, the best way to communicate with digital natives is through email, text, and social media. Allie?
The next generation is Generation Z, also known as Zoomers, iGen, or still really unclassified. It's the demographic cohort succeeding millennials and preceding Generation Alpha. The birth range is 1996 to 2010. Gen Z grew up during the recession, which have led most to be very frugal with money. 57% would rather save their money than spend it. Gen Z wants to do good for the world as they also grew up in the heart of the global warming. 93% say that an organization's impact on society affects their decision to work there. Gen Z prefers to work on multiple tasks at the same time. On average, will work off of 3 screens at once, which I am currently doing. This generation is naturally social and spends 7.6 hours per day socializing and 15.4 hours per week on their smartphones. Gen Z tend to be less focused as they need continuous updates and stimulation. When learning, a frequent phrase used is Google it. 66% say that technology makes them feel that anything is possible. Next up, back to Judy, or Rosalie. Rosalie, you're muted.
Despite these differences, people from the varying generations must work together. Well, we can't automatically assume every single person in a particular generation behaves and thinks a certain way. Knowing the generalities is a great first step. Therefore, we need to take the initiative to learn about the other generations we all work and communicate with. The more we understand each other, the more we will be able to work together without conflict. Simply knowing each other's preferences is one thing. It's another thing to actually spend time learning from the person. Remember that learning and mentoring is a two-way street. Just as younger people can learn things from older people, the older generation can definitely learn from the younger generation. As you all do this, realize that you're likely to have to make compromises. For example, the younger person can teach the older person about some new computer communication tools. The younger person will need to employ patience during the training, and the older person will need to keep an open mind to the new technology. You'll also have to confront your own personal biases and work through them. Only then can you truly benefit from the interaction. Next, Jennifer will talk you through a couple of graphs visualizing how far we have come from the early years to where we are today in communicating with each other. Jennifer?
So this is a really interesting look as communication has progressed over the years. Communication is just as important to us today as it was in prehistoric times. The need hasn't changed much, but the way we accomplish it sure has. Did you know that smoke signals are still used to indicate the selection of a new pope? And I don't think any of us have mailed a letter by pigeon lately. As we get into the 1800s, we're more familiar with the inventions that started to make communication much easier. The telegraph and telephone were introduced. The use of home phones has even evolved from the rotary dial phones and party lines. We've seen pagers come and go. The fax machine isn't widely used in the US anymore. Did you know that still in 2012, Japanese households bought 1.7 million of those old style fax machines? Then we finally go wireless. You've probably seen pictures of the original giant mobile phones. There have been a lot of changes in cell phones, from flip phones to touchscreen smartphones. Did you know that half of US adults live in a household with no landline anymore? In the 80s, we also started sending emails. And in the 90s, we started sending text messages. Many of us are very comfortable in this wireless era. Over 205 billion emails are sent per day, and the average American spends around 3 hours on their mobile device each day. Change starts to happen much faster now. In the 2000s, we've been introduced to Skype, high-def video conferencing, iPhones, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. I mean, you name it, the list goes on and on. It's hard to keep up with the latest technology and the latest trends, but the newest generations only know this fast-paced, high-tech, easily accessible virtual world. Just as the letter writers couldn't imagine sending smoke signals, some of these cell phone users couldn't imagine mailing a letter. We all enter the world at different times and learn the newest form of communication for that time. What was the main way of communication while you were growing up? Have you stuck with that, adjusted with the times? Just remember, the older generations don't necessarily love the new technology, but the younger generations may not like mailing letters or even sending emails. Find that common ground when working across multiple generations. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll just give it back to you, Allie.
All righty. So Jennifer's going to be monitoring the chat, but we are going to kind of open this up for a little bit of communication. Ha ha ha. To see how you interact as chapters. And so I'm just going to kind of ask some questions. We ask that you put it in the chat, and then Jennifer's going to help me out with kind of reading some responses out and kind of have an open forum to see what different chapters across ESA have. So the first question is going to be, how many different generations are in your chapter? So we went through the different generations. So type in if you'll put a number and then maybe the state or city, or if you want to even put your chapter name, just to kind of see how broad some of our chapters are. And Jen, if you want to kind of call out as people are typing.
Yeah, let's see those answers come in. We have 3 in Florida, 5 in Tennessee. Ooh, all in one generation in Minnesota.
Ooh.
We have some baby boomers and Gen X's in Virginia. Ooh, Alpha Delta only has 1 as well. 3 in Arizona, 3 in Missouri, 4 in California. We've got a lot of nice spread out generations here. 3 in Nevada, Washington.
Awesome. Yeah. So next question then, think about your state board or your regional board. How many generations are spread out on those?
All right, we still have some 2s and 3s coming in. 2, 3. Another 3. This might be the consensus here between 2 and 3 serving on boards.
Okay. And then think about those leadership roles, your presidency, your vice presidency, treasurer, secretary. Do those tend to be all one generation? Are they spread out? What's stopping you from having younger generations move forward? So kind of call out too what your leadership role generation looks like. Or is it changing? I know our state in Indiana, we're changing. We have had a good mix of different generations. Same with our board.
Mm-hmm. Chapter leadership includes 3 in Arizona, Colorado 1 to 2, a couple in Tennessee. Ooh, the millennials are coming up in, I don't know your state there, but yep. Those younger generations moving on up. Minnesota has 4.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So would anybody like to come off mute, and we'll just share 1 or 2 people, but to see how do they best target all generations to be in those leadership roles? How are you making sure that all generations feel included and their voices being heard? So if you unmute and want to talk, say your name and what state you're from, please. No? No one?
No one. Everyone's bashful.
I call in Jennifer Skinner from Indiana.
You can't call on a presenter. No,
Okay.
we're trying on some different socials. We're asking them to participate, reaching out, and making sure that everyone has an opportunity. Yeah, keep the answers coming. Keep using the chat if you're more comfortable there.
Yep. Okay, next question, not as hard. Communication method. Were you only meeting in person? Do you only use email? Do you only use Facebook? Do you use an app? How are you meeting and communicating? And again, this is going to go back to what is preferred for generations, but we need to be mindful of all generations and what is the best method to reach everyone.
Up here we have some Zoom coming in. Oh, definitely with COVID, we introduced Zoom. Otherwise, still in person. Zoom in person, emailing, texting. Yeah, we're all across the board here. Facebook for promoting. Yep, same messaging, Zoom. Yeah, everyone's really venturing out, and we're definitely embracing Zoom the last couple of years, right?
Was anyone using a virtual component prior to the pandemic?
Oh, getting some no's. Oh, lots of no's. Yeah, everyone really got to learn something new when the pandemic hit. Yeah.
Now, thinking that maybe the pandemic is ending, we don't know. Do you plan on continuing having a virtual component, or is it just during this crisis that you are going to use it?
Looks like a combination, but some say they're really preferring the in-person. That socialization is really important. But we got a lot of hybrids, combos. There's room for both. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. All righty. Well, I am going to pass it off to the next person. We have Pat.
Hi, that was very interesting. There are specific things that you can do to improve your communication skills. The first is listen. People want to know that they are being heard. Really listen to what the other person is saying instead of thinking about your response. Ask for clarification to avoid misunderstandings. At that moment, the person speaking to you should be the most important person in your life. Who you are talking to matters. It's okay to use acronyms and informal language when you are communicating with a buddy. But if you're emailing or texting your boss, hey, or TTYL, or any informal language has no place in your message. You cannot assume that the other person even knows what that means. Body language matters. This is important for face-to-face meetings and video conferencing. Make sure that you appear accessible, so have open body language. This means you should not cross your arms and keep eye contact so that the other person knows that you're paying attention. Check your message before you hit send. Spell and grammar checks are lifesavers, but they're not foolproof. Double check what you've written to make sure that your words are communicating what you intended to say. Be brief yet specific. For written and verbal communication, practice being brief yet specific enough. You want to provide enough information for the other person to understand what you're trying to say. Write things down. Take notes while you're talking to another person or when you are in a meeting, and do not rely on your memory. Send a follow-up email to make sure that you understand what was said during the conversation. This might be particularly important for us in the older generations. Sometimes it's better to pick up the phone. If you find that you have a lot to say, instead of sending an email, call the person instead. Email is great, but sometimes it is easier to communicate what you have to say verbally. Think before you speak. Always pause before you speak. Take a moment and pay close attention to what you say and how you say it. This one habit will allow you to avoid embarrassments. Treat everyone equally. Don't talk down to anyone, treating everyone with respect. Treat others as your equal. And number 10, maintain a positive attitude and smile. Even when you're speaking on the phone, smile because the other person can tell. When you smile often and exude a positive attitude, people will respond positively to you. Communicating effectively is a teachable skill. Keeping a few of these tips will enable you to hone on your communication skills. And now I return it back to Rosalie Griffith.
Thanks, Pat. That was a lot of good information. Generational differences can be tough. However, when you are open and honest and take time to really listen to each other, you can overcome any perceived differences, real or otherwise. A little generational understanding can go a long way. We hope you have enjoyed the workshop and learned something from it. We would appreciate any feedback you have, and if there are any other subjects you might like us to address, please contact me at the email displayed on the screen. And again, we want to thank all of you for taking time to be with us this evening. And Jennifer, do we have any other questions or that need to be answered on the chat?
Any other questions? No, I think we're good to go unless they're typing vigorously.
Okay, we just want to thank you all again, and we apologize for any of our poo-foos starting up, but you know how technology is. You always hope that it'll work, and it's wonderful when it does work. So anyway, we want to thank you all, and let us know if you have a particular subject you'd like us to cover. We'll be happy to do that at a later workshop. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.